My name is Paul McIntosh. It gives me great pleasure to sit in conversation with Pastor Michael Walrond, minister of the First Corinthian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Paul.
In an effort to try and edify our young people, to embrace the sanctity of their spirit, to embrace black people and people of color in particular, and especially young people, what we've tried to do is to be the architect of experiences that will allow them to touch men and women such as yourself, and hopefully that will give them the courage and the insight into the possibilities within each and every one of them. With that in mind, I'd like to kind of ask you a few questions and to thank you for being here. Okay. But I must begin with a story, and this is something that comes from my own personal experience. I came to New York about 15 years ago, and I took a job as a librarian in a school that's about 10 blocks north of here. And I met a young man who, he had some issues, some personal issues, single parent home. He lived on a block that unfortunately was challenged with violence, and he had some academic problems. But we developed a relationship. When I left that school, I came here, and by this time he was a young man, teenager, and I invited him to come. And on several occasions, he spoke to a gathering of young people in this very library. On one of the last visits when that young man was in this school, some students pulled me aside and said that he was a blood. And I had no real sense of what a blood was or what being in a gang involved. Subsequently, I spoke to him and tried to get him to understand that that kind of behavior really wasn't going to help him to embrace his larger self. Unfortunately, he took offense at what I said to him, and we became estranged. Fast forward about 5 years later, I was on my way to First Corinthian, and he was standing in front of the church on Freestyle Friday. He embraced me with his spirit, and it was as if we had a rapprochement. We embraced the love that we really had for each other. And I felt gratified and thankful that I came to Freestyle Friday that evening. I had no idea who you were. I had no idea of what Freestyle Friday was like, but I came. And that was a very healing moment for me. So I have to thank you for that. And another situation occurred. I was getting out of the subway on a Sunday morning, and there was a sister that I know who's a Yoruba priestess. And we were talking, and I asked her, where was she going? She said that she was going to church. And that kind of like slapped me in my face. I was wondering why she was going to church. She said that she was going to hear you. And as we parted company, one of the things that she said to me, which has stayed with me, I'd like to share with you. She said that she goes wherever the light is. And so I have to say to you that you are that light, your church is that light, and my question is, what is there about the church, First Corinthian, FCBC, that draws people from divergent perspectives into that space and they feel comfortable and empowered? Because frankly, I was quite surprised.
I think there could be several ways to answer this question, but I begin, and I don't want to be too verbose when I say this, but I think that when I came to First Corinthian now 9 years ago, I came after pastoring 8 years at a church in North Carolina, and I was very much non-traditional in terms of what you would consider the stereotypical Baptist preacher. I had no desire as a young man to pastor. When I felt like I was being called into ministry, I was clear that I did not want to pastor because I didn't think I had the kind of tolerance and makeup to be a pastor based on the images I had seen and I had come in contact with as a very young man and then as a young adult. But when I started pastoring, I realized, one, that this was my calling, and two, I was very clear in some of my own prayers and communication with God that I wanted to always be in a place where I had the freedom to help reimagine what ministry could look like, what church can look like, and what an environment that enhances one's spiritual growth could look like. And I've been blessed to be able to do those things, whether it was at the Church in North Carolina or here in New York. I came here to 1 Corinthians because of the tremendous opportunity I saw. I knew Harlem. Everyone in America knows of Harlem. I knew of the church. It was a church that was in need of a boost. Morale was low and membership wasn't really that large, but I believed in the potential and the possibility of this place. But I wanted in my own spirit for that church to be what I had needed in my own life, which was a place of healing, transformation. Because here's what I realized: no matter what your religious background, no matter what your religious affiliation, whether you are Buddhist or Baptist or Yoruba priestess, that we are all human beings who have a commonality in our humanity. We all bleed, we all laugh, we all cry. We all are moved by matters of the heart. We all know what it is to experience extreme joy, but we also all know what it is to experience extreme sadness and sorrow. And I believe that that space at 1 Corinthians could be a space where people can come in contact with what is in common with all of human beings. That means for me, preaching to life issues, preaching and teaching about issues that impact us on a daily basis. And I think for that reason, I've seen a tremendous amount of people be drawn to the message of 1 Corinthians, the spirit of 1 Corinthians, the soul of that place, because it is, one, not only a healing station, but it's also a place of tremendous transformation and growth, but most importantly, a place where people are pushed to dream and believe in what is possible. You don't have to have a title to be able to dream. You don't need a special title to believe in yourself. You don't need a special title to be in an environment that pushes you to have the creative and transformative encounter with God and yourself. That is that kind of space, and I think it is a place where everyone can experience that. For me personally, I'm not only committed to the transformation of those who come, but I'm committed to my own transformation and pushing myself to my own healing. And I think that part of the power of any preacher or pastor is the ability to be transparent, vulnerable, but also using one's story and moments of brokenness and weakness into a catapult into someone else's growth. I was told years ago by one of my mentors, the dean of the chapel at Morehouse, that in order to really affect people's lives, you cannot be afraid to dig so deep within yourself that you come out with other people, that you find other people in your own struggle, you find other people in your own journey, you find other people in your own tears. And I think when you do that, it has a capacity not only to draw people, but then help people reimagine their lives. And I think even this sister that you talked about, the Yoruba priestess, may have encountered that. And as many languages for that, there is light, there is spirit, there is hope, there is transformation. I mean, so many words that embody what this space means and what I feel my calling is. But I think at the end of the day, we have responsibility to be agents of transformation who push people to transcend the limits that have been imposed upon them at the end of the day. And I think all of us are bombarded in some way, shape, or form by ideas and thoughts that seek to hinder our progress. And the real role of a spirit-led person, a God-filled person, a person who believes in the divine power of this universe, is the capacity to help people transcend limits and push past their own weaknesses.
You know, as I listen to you, my internal energy and my internal spirit is really, it's moved. I have to be candid with you. It's been moved ever since I initially met you. But as I was listening to you, I was thinking of something that I often try and communicate to young people, and oftentimes I fail. And if memory serves me correctly, there was a poet who said that it takes more courage to examine the dark parts of your soul than it does for a soldier on the battlefield. I don't remember who it was. But one of my questions to you, because I'm looking for answers, which is one of the reasons why I appreciate the fact that you could be here. What can you say to me, or how can you help me to access what I need to give these young people what they need to explore the self-doubt, the dark parts of themselves, and to become fuller, to become the people that they were meant to be?
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, the first thing, you mentioned it already, in order to do that takes tremendous, I said it at the commencement, ferocious courageousness. I think it takes a courageous person who is willing to look at the shadow side of themselves and to look and, one, not be so shaken by what they see that they forfeit the journey of self-discovery. Our culture is so intoxicated by dualities and false dichotomies that it always separates things, good and bad, light and dark. It is for that reason that we are afraid to encounter what you call the dark side of ourselves. We are so consumed with trying to put forth a facade that always seems to be overwhelmed with light that we're afraid to talk about those dark moments, or what is known as that dark night of the soul. No one wants to talk about the moments of weakness. No one wants to talk about the moments of dread and absurdity and angst that we all deal with. We like to believe that everything is wonderful, that everything is beautiful, that we're pressing toward the positive, that we are always on the journey to do the right thing. To live that kind of life or to put forth that kind of facade is disingenuous to the soul. It is disingenuous to the self, because no one lives that kind of life. And here's the good thing. We are a tremendous combination of what we call the positive, or what we may want to label as the negative. I was reading this book called Embracing Your Shadow by Robert Johnson, and he said, here's the interesting thing. All of us want to be powerful. All of us want to be that charge that ignites the atmosphere in the world. We all want to be those kinds of persons that shift life and shift light and shift lives. And he used such a simple example. He said, if you're looking for a positive charge, or rather an electrical charge, you don't get the electrical charge simply from the positive. You get it from a combination of the positive and the negative. You get the combination of the opposites. When you plug that plug into an outlet, it's a combination of a negative and positive charge that bring forth the power that give life to whatever you are seeking to ignite. That is what happens. So just imagine life being that way. Here you are wanting to ignite the life and the minds of young people, and not willing to engage that negative and positive charge within your own life and your own life. The only way you can impart life to anyone is to be able to embrace the light and the dark, not in a dualistic manner, but in a holistic manner, because that light and dark help comprise who you are.
Why is it that more people don't embrace that philosophy? Well, I've struggled with it. Just what you've said crystallizes much of the angst that I feel in my head. And I quite frankly, I'm perplexed. I work in a school system, and as you know, there are all kinds of problems that we have, even in this building. And I'm at a loss oftentimes as to what I can do or say to make things better. And I don't know whether you're I'm the cure-all, but I'm really searching for answers. Why is it that more people don't embrace that philosophy? And the other question that I really want to ask you is, I read an article that you wrote some months ago, and if memory serves me correctly, you said that God speaks to us in our pleasures. No, God speaks to us, God whispers to us in our pleasures, He speaks to us in our conscience, and He screams to us in our pain. If that's correct.
That's right.
And that kind of stuck with me, and I'm trying to, can you expand on that a little bit?
I'll answer both. One, why people don't embrace that kind of pedagogy of their life is because terror is not deep. It is sheer terror. It is the most fear-generating enterprise to look into your dark places. There's nothing more terrifying than to come face to face with your broken spaces, the fragmented and disjointed places in your life, and to face them and believe that you can still walk away whole. That is terrifying, to think that you can do that. It is something that has given birth to terror and fear in my own life and the lives of many. But there's so many people in our history, great men and women, who have done this, and they realize that the only path to sanctity and wholeness is the path that goes by the way of one's own darkness. But the reason why we don't do it, it is terrifying, because most of us believe that we will be broken because of the journey, that we will be distorted and disjointed because of the journey. That is not true. Here's what I said in church yesterday, a quote from Winston Churchill. He said that when you're going through hell, keep going through. You don't pause. That is the case. On the journey of self-discovery, one of the points of encounter, one of the stopping points is that place of darkness. But if you understand that it is a journey which you're going through, because at the end of the day is the kind of transformed self, then it is not something that will cause so much fear, but also hope. If you look at it one way, you will always be fearful. But if you look at those dark places as the thing that catapults you into a hopeful place, then it can be done. You have to embrace that and embody that. That means then that fear is always temporary, but you know that you are looking for a place of hope and transformation that is on the other side of that kind of terrifying space and moment. That is why I think most people don't embrace it, and why most people don't do it or seek to let it be a philosophy, because it is terrifying. The other reason it's terrifying, I'll make it quick, the other reason it's terrifying is because many of us have developed very nuanced and creative ways to avoid the dark. We have developed all kinds of emotional night lights in our lives that prevent us from completely embracing and looking at the darkness, and we don't want to look at it, and we've built walls and structures in our minds and in our souls that have hindered us from encountering this. And then to do what you said, to actually look at that darkness, to actually embrace it, to see it as a catapult to the light, means the tearing down of structures and walls and boundaries and mechanisms we've created to keep ourselves away from the pain and the hurt. So that means that to do that means to tear down the things you've been holding on to for dear life, and to believe that you'll be better for it. That's why I think other reason. Second thing, the quote you raised from an article I wrote about God screams to us in our pain goes really with the answer to this question. I used to think unfortunate, but now I realize I've been blessed. And it sounds strange, but I've been blessed to have been the bearer of much pain in my life. I have a condition that in the early years, before they found a very nice medical name for it, they used to call it chronic pain disease, or now they call it sarcoidosis. And from the time I was a young man, always very sickly, had surgery, always had pain, and to the point that as a young boy, I remember my mother not understanding what was going on. And even there were those who took me to other doctors to see if it was some kind of emotional issue, that I always kind of thought myself into painful places, but it wasn't. I had a physical condition that I suffered with, still suffer with, that in moments unexpected, I find myself dealing with pain and inflammation and suffering. There was a time in my life where I resented it, where I resented feeling so much pain, where I resented going through pain. I resented the sickness, I resented the medication, I resented the hospitalizations, I resented the surgeries. And I don't want to romanticize it, because there's nothing romantic about suffering in many ways. But what I've learned is that it is in those bleak moments that for me personally, I've heard the loud whispers of God. That is that scream. It is not God screaming audibly, but it is the whispers of God that speak to the human soul in those moments of deep pain. It is when you begin to understand that there is something redemptive, even about a moment that seems to hold no salvific purpose whatsoever. It is in those moments that I believe God speaks and reminds us not only of our birthright of greatness, but also the responsibility we have to be great. And sometimes it is the pain we encounter that becomes the vehicle to that place. The vehicle. It is not universal. It is not paradigmatic for sure. But it is definitely, I think, a conduit to a place in my own journey that my joys would not have taken me to. It is not to negate my joy. It is not to negate my happiness. It is not to negate the moments of pleasure and unbelievable happiness that I've experienced. But I've learned that there are lessons that my pain have taught me that my joy could never have imagined. There are things I've learned in my dark moments that I could have never learned in my laughing moments. Again, it is not either or. They've worked both together. And I think that is what, for me, God screams to us. And that scream is not a scream of condemnation. It is a whisper of love and reassurance that we are not alone, that we are not by ourselves, and that there's divine accompaniment on this journey.
You leave me speechless. And I know you have to go, so I'll only ask you a couple of more questions. Because as I freestyle this conversation with you,
yeah,
there's so many things that just kind of
I need to walk through this myself. So
pop into my head. I just want to switch subjects for a second. As you know, in a few months, the mayoral election will occur. And I'm not asking you who you would endorse, but I know our communities are plagued with, you've taken a stance against stop and frisk, for example, the gun violence, AIDS. What are the crucial issues confronting us as a community? And what do you think we need to be about doing so that we can hopefully preempt some of these problems for the next generation, for our group of young people?
Well, when you say what are the issues, the amazing thing about, I think, life is not only that it's cyclical, but it's consistent and constant. The issues that plague us are not different from the issues that plagued us 50 years ago. You know, this year we're celebrating 50 years of the March on Washington in August. We're part of that continuation. We're saying it's not a commemoration, it's a continuation. Why? Because in Washington in 1963, they were marching for jobs and justice. Think about that. For jobs and justice and freedom. Amazingly, that 50 years later, those are the same issues. Jobs, economic justice, and freedom for so many people in our communities. Which tells us that although we have celebrated the election of an African-American president, that in some ways the election of African-American president does not create this utopia, but it does create a euphoria that has a tendency to make us oblivious to the issues and crises that we face.
So, apropos of that comment, would you conclude that we are not in a post-racial society?
The only persons who can believe we are in a post-racial society are people who are, one, oblivious to history and then blind to the current cultural moment. There is no way that we are in a post-racial America, because the election of one African American in the history of this country to be president does not mean we have arrived. It may mean we have more of a responsibility, but not a rival. So that those issues still plague us in this community alone. You already said it, the gun violence. The drug issue is still here. Poor access to resources that help better our educational attainment. You can call the rolls. Poor mental health practitioners and facilities. Lack of excellent and I think adequate health facilities. Poor housing or no housing. Persons who are looking for jobs and who are qualified but can't find access. All these things have existed for years and generations. And we have seen that when, as a people, in particular African Americans, have took up the case and begun to fight, rarely have we lost a fight we've engaged in. The only time we lose fights is when we refuse to fight. And so what it says now in this season, as you said, what is our responsibility? I think what it takes now, though, is something a little bit different. Because the foes we face and the crises we face are the same, but the nuances are all overwhelming in some ways that cause us to pause and begin now. We have to reimagine and reassess what are the strategies and tactics. Now, whatever those strategies we develop and tactics we develop that are appropriate for the moment are one thing. But here's what we need, Paul. Consistency, right? And to cease in what I would consider a history of reactionary politics. That is what has happened in so many of our communities, where we find ourselves reacting to the issue, reacting to the crisis, reacting to the problem, but we only react when the crisis rears its ugly head. We do not engage in consistent, sustained engagement with issues that are based on our being proactive to see it. We only wait till the school is closing to find out how important it is to keep a school open. We always react to police brutality after someone is beat, but not when there's not a crisis. I mean, that has been our MO. And the only way to shift that is to begin to create a kind of mechanism where we're always engaged, we're always ready to mobilize, we're always ready to galvanize people to deal with issues, not crisis, but issues that face our community, and then develop programs and strategies to confront those particular issues. I think that is what we have to be at. We have to stop being reactionary and start thinking. And unfortunately, that is a language, that is the, not language, that is the practical application of our current political state, where we react to everything. And on top of that, when you have politicians who are more concerned with drive-by sound bites than they are developing policy that really impacts the lives of people daily. And then when you think about those politicians who no longer care about the needs of their constituents, but are so consumed with their own political progress and rise that they make decisions based on their own selfishness and not what is good for the community they represent. That is rampant and pervasive in our current electoral politics and in our local community. So we have to begin to think differently about these things and how we engage, and help young people in particular see the necessity for their civic engagement. I spoke at an event yesterday, and I'll say this and I'll stop, but I spoke at an event yesterday, and I told a group of young people, young adults, young professionals, and mid to late 20s, early 30s, I said to them, just think about how this country has changed, Paul. Think about how it's changed. Again, not in some romanticized sense of change, but we saw in the re-election of President Obama a reality that is scary to those in this country who feel that they are the standard bearers for patriotism. And that is codified language, by the way, what I just said. So an African-American man was re-elected as President of the United States with 39% of the white vote. Think about that. What does that say? That a person can become president of this country with only 39% of the white vote. This is a shift in the cultural dynamics of this country. And for some of us, it is a shift that gives birth to unprecedented joy. But to others, it is a shift that gives birth to unprecedented fear and trembling and trepidation. And that is why you've seen these mechanisms to try to undermine people's right to vote, to shrink the voting pool, to create a space of apathy, to create a sense of hopelessness, to scare people from being civically engaged, because times have shifted. The electorate has shifted. And just imagine that it is possible from now, I think, until we leave this place, that persons can be elected without the majority of the white vote in this country. It is a different place. So when they say post-racial America, they often talk about those who would want to talk about racism as if post-racial, the language of post-racialism is the kind of language that ought to stop us from looking at the obvious signs of racism. It's amazing how they don't speak of a post-racial America when it comes to the fact that people of color become now the majority of the electorate in this country. And that means now not as post-racial, but it is a country and a community that is driven by dynamics that were never thought of 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Because this country was not designed for those who have no power to one day exert power. And that is amazing to me.
My most salient regret in this conversation is that I can't keep you here longer, because I know that you're a busy man, and I don't want to be so selfish as to kind of, because there are just a lot of things I'd like to ask.
We'll do part two at some point.
I mean, I hope you would consider allowing me to do that. But permit me to ask you just a couple of more questions. As I said, there's a lot of other stuff I'd like to ask you. I mean, I really would. I'm sorry, I really would. Of late, I've discovered that you are a poet. I mean, I didn't know that. I know that when you spoke at our last book signing, I was just kicking myself because I didn't have a mic to record your words, and I'm still trying to figure out, you know, what you said, and I haven't been able to do it. And I spoke to Sister Betty, and she said that, you know, you don't recall what you said, but I thought it was just so magical. But I know that you're a poet. So I guess what I'm asking you, and I don't know if this is appropriate, but are you in a position to share some of your work with us here?
Let me tell you about the pieces I've written. It's amazing when I hear people talk about poetry or the pieces I've written.
I'm sorry.
The pieces that I've written that have been read and read by other people, I've never written with the intention of reciting, consistently reciting. A lot of times the pieces that I have written have been to bring healing to my spirit. And in bringing healing to my spirit, I've discovered that they brought healing to other people as well. I will say in one of the pieces I wrote, it's called Life is Calling. There's a constant refrain in the piece that says, I collided into my former self after the collapse of the bridge I built in order to maintain the illusion of distance. That one line has been in my mind for so long, and what it really means is that for me personally and other people, that when we experience traumatic pain, and I have in my life, when we experience traumatizing and paralyzing pain, we try to build bridges away from the place of pain to get away. Sometimes we create alter egos and other identities because we no longer want to revisit that pain. The problem is, and in the piece I said, that one day I discovered that the reason why my bridge that I built away from myself collapsed is twofold. The bridge collapsed because, one, the bridge was made of the leftover scraps of pain I tried to avoid. Secondly, the bridge collapsed because I realized that the bridge I built to take me away from the pain took me to places that created more pain than the pain I was running from. That, to me, is so many of our stories. How we try to move away from those things that have wounded us and damaged us, and in the process found ourselves running into identities and personas that have done more damage than the damaging element that put us on the run in the first place. I collided into my former self after the collapse of the bridge I built to maintain the illusion of distance. That is the line that always stays in my mind, because I realize how many bridges I built and the illusion of distance it has given me in my life.
Those comments give rise to another question in my mind, and I promise you I'll just ask you this question and one more, and then I'll shut my mouth.
Next time I'll come,
okay.
I'll come and read some pieces.
That would be perfect. That would be ideal. Inasmuch as art, and I've heard people say that there's no such thing as art for art's sake. And you obviously are an artist, not just because you write poetry, but I just think that how I observe you, you live your life as an artiste. That's just my, unsolicited assessment. What is the role of art in the lives of our people and humanity in general?
From the time I came to 1 Corinthians, I've spoken about the arts. In fact, one of the tenets of the Dream Center we built is the arts. When we renovated the church in such a way that it will become a cultural and performing arts center in Harlem. For me, I grew up, when I was a young man in elementary school, I played the trumpet. Okay. And I share the same birthday as Miles Davis. And I wanted to be like Miles Davis, right? And I realized that as I got older, I loved the trumpet, but I felt a different calling in the arts to me. I started reading and writing little poetry, and I started seeing images, and And I started preaching. That was my calling. And I realized that preaching was even art. That for me, preaching is one of the supreme artistic moments, especially the way that I am led to preach, because it is a completely and total improvised moment for me. I don't come with a script. I don't come with pre-written ideas. I've prepared myself, I've worked and I've read, but I let that moment become a moment of art and a moment of
jazz,
culture and a moment of jazz, and a moment of divine, and all that comes together, and then something beautiful comes out of it. Art, to me, is a gateway to beauty. Art is a door to human possibility. Art is that which awakens the soul and quickens the spirit. Art is the thing, I think, that gives life and gives flavor to life. Whether it is a young woman like at the commencement who sang the Star-Spangled Banner, but sang in a way that you heard her voice coming through the lyrics. Whether it is a young man who recited poetry at the reading at the night of the young people presenting their work for Wadley. Whether it is a jazz musician, whether it is the preacher, whether it is the singer, whether it is art, it is life. And really good art has a way of touching the soul in such a profound fashion that it instantly causes the person to take a flight and a journey to places that they thought were relegated to their dreams, but then they realize it is part of their own reality. Art pushes you, and the value of art pushes you to begin to see the world as it can be, through the eyes of the soul, through the hand of the poet, through the voice of the singer, through the abilities of the thespian. All of those things are ways that push us to look at life differently. Art, to me, is a beautiful thing. And the artist, no matter what the genre, to me is someone of supreme value. It is the poets in our culture, it is the artists in our culture who ask our culture the questions that our culture often is fearful to answer, because to answer the question of the poet is to face the reality of transformation. And I think that is to me power.
I've been selfish enough, so I'm just going to bring this full circle. But I have to, again, at the risk of being redundant, thank you for a couple of things. One, you've always been here for the young people, and I really appreciate that, because it has made my design easier, because I know so many young people who see you and feel empowered and just elevated. So I have to thank you on behalf of this entire village. I particularly want to thank you because of that young man that I referenced earlier, this former blood, who is a member of your church, because we were going through some rough times. I thought that I had lost him, but thanks to the church and you, because he referenced you personally. And I could mention a number of people that have referenced you personally. And I just feel thankful that they have a means to embracing the possibilities within themselves. And if I can go be even a little more personal than that, you know, I'm basically a country boy. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia. Grew up picking cotton, and then my mother and father, you know, they gave me what they could, but I essentially grew up without houses and getting water from pumps. And in fact, I can remember these two old ladies who used to say that, you know, God was going to look out for me. When I was getting ready to go to school, I had no money. In fact, I hitchhiked, and the lady up the street gave me an old pair of pants, and the lady down the block gave me an old beat-up suitcase. And they said a prayer for me and sent me on my way. And fast forward all these years later, I can sit here and have this conversation with you. And for me, this conversation is personally nurturing and empowering. So I have to thank you for that. And if I can just conclude with the words of the Comanche Indians, and I remember, well, they were Cherokees as I recall, but this saying of the Cherokees goes something like this: you were born, you cried, and people rejoiced. Live your life so that when you die, you rejoice and people cry. And if that makes any sense, that's sort of like the message that I'm getting from you. And again, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to sit here and talk to you.
And this has been my pleasure, and I will definitely come back again. I want to share this really quick. Okay. You said that. It's amazing how the universe works. And Augusta, Georgia, holds a special place in my heart. Now, my family is not from the South. I'm the first U.S.-born citizen of my family. My family is from the island of Barbados, mother and father. Augusta, Georgia, has a church in Augusta called Springfield Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia. Small wooden church. So let me tell you about
which street?
I'm not sure of the street. I've spoken there. Springfield Baptist Church in 1867. And some Baptist missionaries came together along with some former slaves in the basement of this church, which, by the way, was also where the Georgia State Republican Party was founded, believe it or not, in the Black Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia. 1867, some white missionaries, Baptist missionaries, and some former slaves who had erected the church came together in the basement of that church. It was dark, had no light. They took candles, and in the dark, it said they lit candles in the dark. And in this meeting they had, they began to lay out a plan for what would be the Atlanta or the Augusta Institute, then the Atlanta Baptist Institute, which today is known as Morehouse College.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Morehouse College was founded in Augusta, Georgia.
I didn't know that.
In the basement of Springfield Baptist Church, where they lit candles in the dark to begin this institution. To me, that is a story of so many great things. Augusta means much for me. Morehouse is my alma mater. If there's no Springfield Baptist, there's no Atlanta Baptist Institute, there's no Morehouse College, and in many ways, there's no me. So part of my roots that run deep in the fabric of this country have origins in Augusta, Georgia. So I'm thankful, and that is where your roots run deep, so we share that.
My brother, I thank you very much.
Pleasure,
thank you.
Pleasure.
And we're going to hold you to coming back to read some of your poetry.
Yes, I promise that.
All right.